Deep in the heart of Texas lies Wintervale, a small, seemingly unremarkable town with a population of several thousand. However, behind its cozy streets and friendly residents, there was a dark secret that people preferred not to speak of aloud. Many years ago, a boy named Todd Smith lived there, and everyone who grew up in these parts knew his story. From a very young age, Todd exhibited strange tendencies, preferring to play not with other children, but to butcher small animals, putting them back together as if they were toys. His cruelty knew no bounds, and soon he grew tired of animals. One horrible day, he went further and started hunting people, tearing them apart like his previous victims. Todd was shot by the Wintervale sheriff, who emptied his revolver into him. But even after Todd's death, his house stood aside, as if a dark and silent witness to all his crimes, biding its time. This house remained untouched, as if the darkness itself guarded it. Over the years, whispers about the sinister place began to attract supernatural enthusiasts, and that's how Taylor and Jack, young influencers, found themselves at the doorstep of the notorious house. Taylor and Jack were gaining popularity on YouTube by exploring abandoned places and hunting for ghosts. Videos from the creepiest locations brought them thousands of views, and they had long been searching for something special that would secure their success for a long time. The house of Todd Smith, the legend of the killer, and the eerie stories of the locals, this is what drew them to Wintervale. They were driving in an old SUV, and the camera was on. Taylor turned the camera on herself, smiling into the lens. "What's up, my loyal fans? Today Jack and I are heading into the Devil's Lair, the house of Todd Smith, the creepiest killer you've ever heard of in Texas." Jack, who was driving, snorted, "Tell them the story of these sick bastards." Taylor laughed and continued, "Well, I'm sure every freaking person in America knows about Todd Smith, the surgeon killer, the devil doctor, or his most famous nickname, the Boogeyman. This psycho killed people like they were lab rats, stitching their bodies back together like he was playing with dolls." "What a sicko," Jack muttered darkly, turning onto the gravel road that led to the house. The house appeared suddenly, as if out of nowhere, standing in the middle of a field, like a black silhouette against the sunset. The windows were closed, but it seemed like shadows lurked behind them, watching every move. Jack parked the car right in front of the house and they got out. Taylor recorded everything on camera, aiming the lens at the dark windows that stared back at them like empty eye sockets. "Do you think he ever got laid here?" Jack asked, looking around. Taylor snickered. "Only with corpses. Maybe they approached the door." And Jack grabbed the handle, the camera still recording. "Well, that would be his style," Jack smirked, pushing the door open. The house was empty and dark, but surprisingly, everything inside was in order. No signs of destruction, everything was in its place, as if someone had just tidied up. Taylor looked around suspiciously, her voice trembling. "What the hell? He must have risen from the dead to clean up for our arrival." Jack chuckled, stepping further into the house. "Well, it seems the house isn't as creepy as we thought. The viewers will be disappointed." Suddenly, the silence was pierced by a sound. Gentle notes of classical music started playing from somewhere below. Jack froze, then crouched and pressed his ear to the floor. "Holy shit! Do you hear that?" he whispered. Taylor nodded, her eyes wide with fear. With a sudden creak, the basement door swung open, and they exchanged glances. Jack smirked. Maybe this crappy house isn't so boring after all. But Taylor began to tremble, her hands shaking as she stepped back. "Jack, I really don't like this." Jack turned to her. "Hey, listen, I'll go down, and you can stay here. Just give me the camera." Taylor reluctantly handed over the camera, and Jack headed to the stairs leading to the basement. The music grew louder with each step, and soon his figure disappeared into the darkness. Minutes passed, and anxiety filled Taylor. She glanced at the door leading outside, but something was drawing her toward the basement. "Jack, please, Jack, just come out," she shouted. But her only response was the loud thudding of footsteps on the wooden stairs. Then something started to rise from the darkness, and Taylor stepped back, her eyes fixed on the stairs. Out of the basement emerged a creature that could only be described as horrifying. A tall man with long, filthy brown hair and skin that was wrinkled and disgustingly hanging off his body, like a mask. He was wearing a brown leather apron, stained with something dark, and baggy army cargo pants. He was holding something in his hand, and Taylor gasped when she realized it was the head of her partner, Jack. Blood dripped from his hair onto the floor, and his empty eyes stared straight at her. Taylor froze, her mind refusing to process what was happening. A blood-curdling scream tore from her chest as the man smiled, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Pretty girl," he rasped, his voice deep and rough. "I'm going to make you perfect." The next morning, the police arrived at the house. The front door was wide open, and the sheriff was the first to enter, his revolver drawn. The officers headed to the basement, glancing warily at every corner. The silence of the house was ominous, as if the very atmosphere was saturated with the horror that had taken place there. The sheriff cautiously descended the stairs into the basement and froze, his eyes widening in shock. He saw something that could only be seen in the most gruesome nightmares. The bodies of Jack and Taylor were mixed and sewn together, their limbs stitched to one another, as if they were dolls created from different parts. Jack's head was on Taylor's torso, but the long hair belonged to Taylor. Their faces were twisted into grotesque masks of pain and fear. The sheriff barely managed to hold back his nausea, his hands trembling as he stepped back. "For God's sake, it happened again," he muttered, crossing himself. "Tell the parents we couldn't find them. We can't risk this getting out." Soon rumors began circulating around Wintervale again. The townspeople whispered about Todd Smith's house, about the dark forces that dwelled there. No one dared to come close anymore. In the minds of the people, the sinister house had become a place where the true boogeyman lived. The silence that emanated from that house remained unbroken, except for the occasional barely audible sounds, a whisper of something unspeakable.